Hi, guys, and welcome again to Ken Michaels Radio. Thanks to all of you for all your support in my new YouTube page. It's still relatively new. Been doing this for a few months, and here on my channel, I like to interview people in the Beatle world, authors, people who have worked with the Beatles. I even host some podcasts, and we have a special guest with us. Well, they're all special on the show this time, and it's Dylan Sevey. Dylan has been a guest on the Two Legs solo Paul McCartney podcast several times, and that's how I became familiar with him. And I must tell you that I'm thoroughly impressed with so much of what he said on that show. It's very insightful what he says, and every time he's been on the show, he's always said something that has stop me in my tracks. And I would say, what? And I'd want to know why he feels the way that he does. But, I love to talk to people about the Beatles, and it doesn't matter to me whether they're my age, younger. Dylan is much younger than me. I won't say how much, but he knows so much about the Beatles, the group music, the solo music, and that's why I wanted to have him on the show. Dylan's also a musician, and he plays many different instruments, although drums is your main one, would you say?
Yes. Yep.
I've seen you on YouTube and you're playing the guitar to a Tom Petty song. So,
Yes.
how many instruments do you play?
Drums and guitar are the main ones that I would say I'm good at. I can fiddle my way around the mandolin. Okay, I'm staring at my mandolin in the garage right now. Can pluck my way around most any stringed instrument I can sort of figure out. But mostly drums and guitar. I could fake the bass if necessary, and tried playing the bassoon once. That didn't go particularly well, but yeah, drums mostly. We'll go
Okay.
with those.
Well, apart from being knowledgeable on the Beatles catalog and their history and the solo music, he also brings you the perspective from a musician's point of view. So I like adding that into the mix in the conversation as well. Before we start talking about the Beatles, I've got to ask you a question about Two Legs because Dylan actually he prepared the intro to the show and the show closed, the scoring music. And what he did very cleverly is he took a few solo McCartney songs and he kind of rewrote them with a little bit of a twist to it to make it slightly different from the actual recordings. And in the show intro, he took 1985 and he made it something that's very much like it, but not exactly. And then at the show close, he took Junk or a sing along Junk, and then he composed something which is very much like it. So, having had the honor several years ago of talking to Neil Innes, who was the master of taking Beatles songs, rewriting them, creating completely new songs that really stand on their own as songs, I asked him how he does it, and he made it sound like it was simple. So I want to ask you how you're able to do that and still have it sound like a different song, even though you're borrowing heavily from those two songs.
Yeah, well, when you're a genius like me or Neil Innes, clearly him and I are in very much a similar ballpark, I would say. No, far from it. But I would say, without at all saying it's easy, it does just come down to, I think, having a basic understanding, certainly, of music. I would say music theory, but just being able more so to have a good ear and to recognize what makes a song stand out. So for something like 1985, you think of the piano first and foremost. And so, okay, if I'm going to make something that is vaguely reminiscent or not so vaguely reminiscent, I need to break it down. So with Paul, a lot of his piano compositions, especially in his solo years, it's a combination of in the left hand, which is playing on the lower notes of the keys, he does an octave, doom, 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 doom.
Right.
You hear that, let him in, doom, 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 doom.
Get on the right thing.
1985.
Get on the right thing.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Going back and forth there, and then figuring out what you're doing in the right hand, which is more the melody. So with 1985, it was recognizing, okay, bum, 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 bum. So, okay, if I'm doing an octave here and recognizing, okay, he's playing these intervals of these two notes, descending, going down. What if I went up? What if instead of going dun 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 dun, I went dun 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 dun? And yeah, he's an E flat. I'll do it in C because I can't really play the piano. And like Ringo said, I can play the piano if it's in C. So so just being able to look at the individual elements and then going from there, okay, 1985, it's also got a relatively easy but steady propulsive beat. Okay, we'll lay down something like that. Pretty prominent shaker that's aiding that. The synth comes in. So just being able to look at the distinctive qualities that make a song and thinking, okay, well, I'm not going to take the same exact melody or the same exact approach, but if I'm able to, I guess, just sort of study what is making this, I guess, hit the way that it's hitting the listener, how do I recreate that? And so really that's all it, I hate to say that's all it is. It's simple, but yeah, just having a good enough ear, being able to study what makes the song. And yeah, Karina Crore, which I believe they've switched out for this new season, is now the opening theme. And that was a lot of fun because that was as simple as studying Paul's drumming in general, and then especially on that song. Paul, you can tell he definitely learned from the school of Ringo. Being around him, he has a very bouncy feel. I talked about this a little bit, I think, on the last Two Leg show. Ringo has a very distinctive drumming style that's almost halfway in between, straight and swung. So, a straight beat is da 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 boom da da. A swung is a da 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 da. Ringo fits in this in between, and you hear that a lot in his fills. A Day in the Life, boom, boom, boom. There's a bounce to it, and Paul, especially in the early years with his drumming, very much took from that as well. And so with the 1985 Sound Alike, it was, all right, I'm going to do my best early Paul sloppy drum impression, and played it, overdubbed it. So there's two parts going at once, and do some heavy breathing. And there you go. You got Karina Crore.
Yeah.
And so I'm really glad that those stood out to you as much as they did.
Yeah. Remind me before the end of this show, I want to get your impression of Paul as a drummer. We'll get to that. Okay.
We will.
But let's just start by finding out how you first got into the Beatles. By the way, since your name is Dylan, which is a cool name,
thank you.
I'm guessing that your parents are Bob Dylan fans.
Yes, I am. I am named after Mr. Zimmerman, and Bob is my number 2 behind the Beatles. Bob means so much to me. I mean, that could be a whole different podcast, but no, my parents are great. My older sister, my dad wanted to name her Jessica after the Allman Brothers song, and my mom said, we can't do that because people are going to call her Jessie, and I'm going to hear Rick Springfield in my head for the rest of my life, and I can't have that. So they named her Erica after Clapton. And then my dad tried again with the Allman Brothers. He wanted to name me Dwayne, and my mom said, we're not Southern and we're not Black. We can't name our kid Dwayne. So I got Dylan, and I love the Allman Brothers. I love Dwayne Allman. But I don't think I look like a Dwayne. So I'm glad I got Dylan.
You look like a Dylan to me.
I look like a Dylan.
Yes,
but
you do. And a Ringo.
Well, I mean, it's there.
I know.
If you know any good casting directors out in Hollywood, please put in a good word for me.
All right. Well, think of you first.
Please.
Okay.
But yeah, so growing up, music was certainly big in the household, and there was a Neil Young record I fell asleep to every night for probably 4 or 5 years, and I knew I was named after Dylan. I knew my sister was named after Clapton, and I knew of those artists, and I liked them to varying degrees. But to me, it didn't matter if it was John Fogerty or Smash Mouth
Hmm.
or Pink Floyd or Leanne Rhymes or In Sync. Music was music, and to some degree, I actually think that's probably the right way or the beautiful way to feel. But yeah, to me, I didn't really understand all that. And then around the time I was 8 years old, we got a computer with a CD burner, so you could make mix CDs, which was so exciting for my dad because him and his friends back in the old days made so many mixtapes for each other.
Uh-huh.
Burning off their vinyl onto cassette, and now you had more room. It was a little easier to do, and so I made a mix CD, and since I was 8, I was happy for about 37 minutes, and I needed to make a new one.
Hmm.
And it had all the top hits. Love Shack, Livin' La Vida Loca, um, Leanne Rhymes, I think, was big for me at the time. And but my dad decided by the time I was ready to make my second mix CD that he needed to open up the doors a little bit.
Hmm.
And so theoretically, the Beatles, I think, are the perfect band for an 8-year-old boy. I mean, or an 8-year-old person of any gender. Yellow Submarine and
Hmm.
Octopus's Garden, I Want to Hold Your Hand. So he gave me the White Album with Helter Skelter and Revolution 9 and Wild Honey Pie.
Right.
And, I remember my childhood and such fleeting memories, like I think a lot of us do. But I so vividly remember being 8 years old at my childhood home, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor next to my boombox, not moving for however, an hour and a half, however long the White Album is. And the
Hmm.
only time I'm moving is to change out disc 1 and put in disc 2, and reading the lyrics and, feeling my mind just molding and changing,
Hmm.
and and looking at all the photos and not knowing what was going on. And it's such a cliche thing to say, but I truly was never the same. It was either that day or the next day I was setting up literal pots and pans in the kitchen, trying to play the drums and trying to know everything. And I think at the time, my dad had a lot of Beatles on vinyl, but for whatever reason over the years, he had only collected the White Album and Let It Be on CD. So I went to Let It Be next, and I didn't know at the time that the White Album is far and away the biggest sort of outlier in the discography in terms of not sounding like anything else. To me, that was the Beatles. That's what they said. And like, certainly Sergeant Pepper doesn't sound anything like Please Please Me, but the White Album is so diverse.
Yep.
Some of it is very stark, songs on there that are far more stark than anything else on any other record. But yeah, like, who was I to know? Like, yeah, Cry Baby Cry is probably what every Beatles song sounds like. But I remember, Let It Be, I think it probably took me a song or two, but it was like, yeah, okay, I think I recognize that voice. Yeah, okay, like this makes sense. I get this. And then probably a couple weeks later, I'm in the car with my grandmother listening to an oldie station, and Please Please Me comes on, and she's like, hey, look, it's your new favorite band, it's the Beatles. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, shut up. Of course not. But I mean,
It's really funny you're saying this because I made a comment, I think, when I interviewed Jeff Slate on my
mhm,
YouTube channel. And I was saying that if you're a teenager now and you're learning about the Beatles, and let's just say somebody plays Please Please Me and then plays Tomorrow Never Knows, you would never think it's the same band. But it's a
never.
very different reaction if you're growing up and you're hearing it all chronologically. And the changes in the group weren't as drastic, because everything was gradual. There wasn't,
Hmm.
I know that Rubber Soul was such a turning point for the group, but coming out of Help, and it seemed pretty natural to me. It didn't seem so drastic. and Revolver was a big change, as was Sergeant Pepper. Actually, I think
Hmm.
Rubber Soul to Revolver is far more drastic than Revolver to Sergeant Pepper. But
I agree.
yeah, the White Album is, to me, the most eclectic of all albums of rock, to the extreme.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing. And I think I don't want to miscredit it, but I think it was Robert Rodriguez who said that he viewed it in some ways as a concept album, with the concept just being American music. Every sort of it really, honestly, Western music in general, if you count even the British influences, because across that record
Hmm.
you have pop, rock and roll, avant-garde, jazzy influences, bluesy influence, country, everything. And but I completely agree with you because having been obsessed with this band for over 20 years now, probably every 2 or 3 years I will just go back and listen in order from Please Please Me to Let It Be, with all the non-album tracks in between when they came out. And you're totally right. When you listen in order, the lineage feels natural. By the time you get to Tomorrow Never Knows, yeah, it sounds out there, but you're not like, oh, where did this come from? Like, no, like, yeah, kind of the flow of this album was just leading up to this. In fact, just over the course of this pandemic, me and my best friend back home in Rhode Island, we did that to pass the time. We would time it out where we press play on every record in real time and sort of react back and forth with each other. And yeah, you don't feel like I didn't see this coming. Please Please Me, Through with the Beatles, Through Hard Day's Night, kind of makes sense. And by the time you're in Beatles for Sale, you don't necessarily think like, oh, this is a lot more sort of Americana country folk sounding than the first couple of, it's just no, like they're incorporating the basic elements of what they've always done into something that's kind of new. But I mean, you can make an argument that if you strip it down, Please Please Me is a folk song anyway. It just doesn't sound like it. It sounds like a British beat group. And then yeah, by the time you get to Rubber Soul and Revolver, it kind of makes sense. And by the time you get to Let It Be, it's a fun journey. But if you listen to Ask Me Why and then you go listen to I Want You, She's So Heavy,
Yeah.
you get like, huh? The same guy wrote these? The same guy is singing them? Yeah. I mean, that is the beauty of it. And yeah, the White Album, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, although I mean, of the 13 albums, I would probably say 8 or 9 of them for me are 5-star records, and the remaining are 4.5-star records.
What?
What is? Yeah. Now hear me
That's
out here.
okay. That's
I know.
okay. That's fine.
But yeah, well, yeah. I mean, there's not a single Beatles. The worst Beatles song for me is like, yeah, it's a great song. Like
I know.
I don't know, something like, I don't know, Not a Second Time. Not a Second Time might be my least favorite.
Okay.
And I'm like, yeah, that's a great song. There's nothing wrong with it. There's just 210 Beatles songs I like better.
Yeah.
But the White Album, I don't know if it's my favorite, but it holds such a special place in my heart for me because it changed everything. And it's not just the reason I got into the Beatles and the solo careers. It's the reason I got into Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones and Jimi Hendrix and the Doors and Creedence and the band and Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen and Janis Joplin. And yeah, and honestly, even eventually Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Charles Mingus, Muddy Waters, Little Walter, people from all like having that desire to expand my musical horizons, like, and I want to know who else was playing at the same time of these guys. Who were they influencing? Who is influencing them? What else was coming out at the time in other genres? And then going back and being able to discover, okay, what came out in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and following up, there's amazing music from the 15th century, and there's amazing music that came out last week. I mean, I've listened to 100 new albums this year, and there's probably 20 or so that I think are magnificent. And so I have the White Album to thank for that passion and that drive. So that's how I got into the Beatles.
I admire your open-mindedness. There's a lot of Beatle fans that think that today's music is all awful, and most of them don't take the time to listen, or they think that it's all rap today, which is, a lot of the charts is dominated by that, but there's so much more than that. And even then, it's got to tell you something when rap music has been, a viable genre of music in terms of sales for 40 plus years. So, I never knock anybody's taste at all,
No, well, and that's assuming, like, when people think that, it shows that you're not paying attention and looking, like, the pop radio or what is popular is not what it used to be. In 1971, sure, pop music was Sticky Fingers and Fillmore East and Who's Next, and I wish it was like that today, I guess. But if you don't like what's on the radio, it just means you need to go digging deep more. And if you don't care to, and that's your prerogative, then that's fine. You're also assuming, if you assume it's all rap, it's like, well, there's also a lot of good rap music. My favorite rap music is not necessarily the stuff on the radio, and hip hop for me is not. I'm a rock and roll kid, and I definitely go for jazz, blues, folk music after that. But I mean, I played in a hip hop band, and I think some people would be amazed if they listened to the Roots or Atmosphere, or even a lot of really great underground stuff that utilizes a lot of classic influences. But if it's not people's thing, or if they don't care to go into it, that's their issue. But you're right, it does show some people's what's the word I'm looking for when you're not paying attention? Ignorance. There you go. I know the English language.
So what is your favorite Beatles album, if the White Album is not it? Today it's
I would say 9 days out of 10 it's Abbey Road. I think that Abbey Road, across the board, I mean, from a fan's perspective, the number of brilliant songs on that record, I mean, to start off with, the 1-2 punch of Come Together and Something, it is magnificent. Obviously all of side 2, including Here Comes the Sun, which comes before the medley. What's the quote unquote worst track on that record? Again, Maxwell. I love Maxwell Silverhammer. Octopus Garden. I love Octopus Garden. Whether or not you're a musician, to be able to appreciate, I think that is Paul's best record as a bassist. That's George's best record as a guitarist. It's Ringo's best record as a drummer. And John's influence on that record may not be as large as it is on other records, but he brought Come Together and I Want You to the table, which, if nothing else, though, even if it was just those two and not even the great stuff in the medley,
because
exactly, I think
that's a
masterpiece. Is brilliant. I love that record. To me, I just marvel at. And then, I think all of their records sound great from a production standpoint, but I don't know. I'm not really good with knowing, like, they recorded all that record with Sennheiser 57 microphone. Like, I have a bunch of friends who are gear nerds who know every guitar that George played on every song and what mics were used where. I'm not good with that. I do think that some of the recording techniques on Abbey Road were different than any record before it, which would make sense to me because there's just there's a warmth to that record that is just magnificent. And I loved the 2017 Sgt. Pepper remix and the 2018 White Album remix. I don't know if they're my go-to mixes for those records necessarily, even though I think some songs were, I don't want to say improved, but I do love what they did with them. With Abbey Road, it's not that I don't like the remix, but I'm just like, I think this is already the greatest sounding record of all time. Like, what are you gonna do to make this sound better?
Right.
I mean, every time I've ever put it, like, just the opening bass on Come Together is like a blanket. I'm the worst musician ever. I don't do drugs. I don't drink. I don't do anything like that. I never have. The hardest drug I've ever done is Tylenol PM. But like, I feel like when I put on Abbey Road and I hear that bass, it's like, I don't need it. I mean, I'm sure it's amazing, but I don't need it. It's yeah. But again, ask me tomorrow, it could be Revolver. Ask me a day after that, it could be the White Album. Or, I mean, Hard Day's Night is probably a top 5 Beatles record for me. I mean, I probably wouldn't put Sgt. Pepper in my top 5, and it's probably a top 20 record of all time for me. That's just the breadth of their catalog. I mean, this may come as a shock to you, but they were a really good band, and that may come as a shock to your listeners.
Really?
But they put out some really good music.
George Harrison said we had a few good tunes.
Just, I remember. So I've actually kind of tying into what I was just talking about when I was getting into all those bands. I've also been always very, very fascinated and borderline obsessed with trying to rank things. And I'm kind of mad that it's becoming like the new fad on YouTube and podcasts, because I've been doing it my whole life. And I also have been working on this ranking project for the last 2 years. Like, oh, no one's doing this. And now all of a sudden everyone's doing it. And by the time my thing is done, people will be like, okay, dude, like just another one. But I mean, when I was growing up, I was devouring, the Rolling Stone top 100 artists of all time, the top 500 albums of all time. Because there is no best artist of all time. There is no best album or song of all time. It is all subjective, but trying to quantify the unquantifiable is really fascinating to me. And there's so many ways to do it. If you asked me to rank the tracks on a record, I'd say, okay, well, do you want me to rank my favorite to least favorite, or do you want me to try to objectively rank, from a compositional standpoint, from how much impact the song, because if I was, ranking all the Beatles songs in terms of impact, Let It Be is a top 10 song. If I'm ranking my personal favorites, Let It Be is maybe just outside the top 50. And I love that song. I love it. I mean, Let It Be has made me cry. But if you ask me right now, do you want to listen to Let It Be or Hey Bulldog? I mean, yeah, I want to hear Hey Bulldog. And it's not because it's a better composition. It's
it could be preference. That you're so used to hearing it, it might be burnt out from radio airplay or whatever. Maybe, I don't want radio to affect me that way, but I have to admit that it does. There are a few Beatles songs that I'm tired of hearing, but it doesn't mean I don't love them.
Oh yeah, or even like you, and I'm sure we'll talk about this at some point, but trying to gauge, how much you like something. There are so many songs I can think of that I like by different artists where I think, if this was by anyone else, I probably wouldn't like this song. But because I do have this natural bias of liking this artist and appreciating this artist, you put in a little more effort, like I'm a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. And And I really like the Born in the USA record. I think almost every track on that record is great. But I don't love the production of that record. And if that record was by someone I don't like, if that record, same lyrics, same chord progression, same everything, and it was by Bon Jovi, I would never listen to it. I'd be like, this is crap. I hate this. But it's Bruce, so I'm willing to be like, okay, well, I like this guy. I understand him. I know where he's coming from. I'm going to give it time. You know, it took me a long time to really like Don't Come Around Here No More by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And I still am now like, if this was by another artist, I still might be iffy about it, but I love Petty. And, you know, over time, that song's really grown on me. So yeah, you know, radio can do, we all have our biases and things that affect us that we don't want to. It's like, you know, how do you listen and judge Double Fantasy like, you know, objectively? Like, I'm just going to listen to the music on this record and say what I think about it without thinking about the fact that he died 3 weeks after it came out. It's borderline impossible, if not impossible, to listen to Double Fantasy. You know, you almost have to give it to someone blindly who's never heard of John Lennon and say, tell me what you think of this record. You know, those things are hard. You know, same thing with All Things Must Pass. And I think All Things Must Pass is a brilliant record as it is, even if you take it out of context. But knowing the story behind it at least makes it more intriguing. It might not make the music better, but it makes the listening experience different. And it makes, you know, same thing we were talking about. Yeah, you don't want to let radio affect you. Like, you know, you don't want to be tired of hearing Imagine because you love the song, you appreciate how great it is. But I mean, how many times have you heard the song Imagine?
Yes.
In the last 50 years.
There's so many other songs I'd rather hear from John than Imagine, and yet I understand how much it's a classic and the message of the song. Yeah, but you know, we have a, I don't know, it's a similar and yet different point of view when it comes to songs, because I'm very much a song man, and I always feel that the song is far more important than the recording and what the musicians bring to it. And part of the reason why the Beatles catalog, at least the group catalog, because it's more familiar than the solo catalog, why it's endured is because the songs are strong first. There are so many people who have covered Beatles music, and yet I will always have a preference for the Beatles recordings of their own music. And yet, you know, I do love cover versions a lot, but you shouldn't just judge how great a song is by how many cover versions there are, because, you know, I can't imagine any band doing Bohemian Rhapsody better than Queen. You know, you can't just base it on, or all the progressive rock that's out there, that you can't touch the bands who did them. And they're so complicated to do. So,
I mean, have you heard Limp Biscuits cover of Behind Blue Eyes? Because let me tell you, it really rivals the original.
Really?
No, it doesn't. It's terrible.
Okay.
But I know what you're talking about, and it definitely can, I guess, sort of highlight. I was actually talking with our friend Andy Nichols this morning of the Two Legs podcast, because he in recent years has also become a huge Bob Dylan fan, and so when he found out that I was a big fan too, him and I've been talking a lot recently about it, and a big thing with music fans, I say music fans, that's such a general statement, kind of just people, is there's a lot of people who have a hard time with Bob Dylan's voice, which, you know, I get it to the extent that there are singers that I, you know, I would much rather watch and listen to Paint Dry than hear Axl Rose or Geddy Lee sing. You know, like I can't do it, but it doesn't take away my appreciation for how good, you know, their bands might be or how good they are at their craft. It's just a preference thing. For me, Bob's voice has never bothered me, but I'm sure you've heard this a billion times too, but people will say like, well, I like it better when other people sing his songs. Which, and I have to imagine that Bob Dylan, his entire catalog. Like he might not have a single song that's been covered as much as a song like Yesterday or Imagine, but his whole entire catalog, he has to be one of, if not the most covered artist, because people appreciate his songwriting so much. But with all of his covers, and I've listened to literally thousands of Dylan covers, there are maybe 5 that I prefer over Bob's. There's not a single Beatles, and there are Beatles. I mean, the Wilson Pickett "Hey Jude" is, I mean, you've heard it. It's unbelievable. There's a few. I mean, Aretha Franklin doing Eleanor Rigby. There's so many, but yeah, I don't. There's nothing like those original recordings, and again, I'm sure we'll get into this maybe in a little bit. I don't want to get too off track, but that is occasionally where production can come in, and you know, there's been a lot of talks about what production means and how much it matters, and what does overproduced or underproduced mean, and how can any of that talk. And I have some thoughts on that I want to discuss with you, but we can talk about other stuff first, because I don't want to go all Kerouac on you. And
that's okay. I really want to talk about the solo music, but you also said something just now, like I said, you say things that stop me in my tracks.
Okay.
You know, you said Paul's bass playing was the best on Abbey Road. Ringo's drumming was his best on Abbey Road. I mean,
in my opinion,
so debatable.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
For all that I've heard about, nothing can top Ringo's drumming on A Day in the Life, you know, for example. You know, what, as a drummer especially, what is it about Ringo's drumming on Abbey Road that impresses you so much?
Well, I feel like really in general, I think Ringo between 68 and 71 as a drummer are just especially the prime years, because he has so many amazing performances before then. And yeah, the ones that everyone talks about, obviously A Day in the Life, She Said, Rain. But I mean, even going back, I mean, that live performance of Boys from Washington in 64, I mean, there's I forget what city, I know it's 64, but it's one performance of I Saw Her Standing There, where I remember watching it and being like, and pardon my French, but I'm like, that's fucking punk rock. I mean, like, people like, and Keith Moon for me, I mean, Keith Moon for me is top 3 drummer of all time. You know, everyone credits Keith Moon, and I understand why, with the wild madman drumming, and certainly consistently he brought that. But Ringo was doing Keith Moon before Keith Moon, if you really watch and listen to that, you know, to those early performances. But I think why I say Abbey Road and that sort of era in particular is his best is because once they stopped touring, I feel like all of them to different degrees were sort of able to get back in touch with their instruments, because while they were touring, I would never, they didn't at all become worse musicians, but they were going so much all the time that they, I think when they were recording, they were spending, I think, a little more time sort of exploring different influences and soundscapes, that by the time they stopped touring, they were able to look a little bit more into their craft as musicians, and taking what they were already so good at and just improving on it. Paul's bass playing is fantastic across all the early records. But I do think, again, and especially this last time that I listened through the discography, part of it's a way that the bass was recorded, because Jeff Emmerich came on during Revolver and you can hear it. But Paul's bass playing on Revolver is like, oh, you know, like, it's not at all to say it wasn't good, it wasn't great, but it goes from great to next level for me
Okay.
with starting at Revolver. And same thing with Ringo. And I think with Ringo, it was an adjustment because he was able to kind of take that wild man band rock and roll energy that he has. He was also able, I mean, Ringo was always so adept at playing to the song. He was always able to marry those two. And then his inventiveness also just went up a notch. And you hear it, you hear it across the White Album too. But with Abbey Road, I mean, talk about all those things. I mean, playing to the song, I mean, something is a master class. But most of that song is literally just kick, snare. There's no hi-hat, but then throwing in those like unbelievable how he's able to fill in that space, knowing what space needs to be filled in, what space doesn't need to be filled in. And then from, being able to do all the cool stuff, quote unquote. I mean, those fills on Oh Darling, dun, 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 but, super quick fills. Everything he's doing across I Want You towards the end of that song, everything he does during You Never Give Me Your Money, he's taking all three elements of his style that I think what makes Ringo is that combination of playing to the song, his actual ability, again, what people will call the cool stuff, and his inventiveness. And on Abbey Road, I think it's just that perfect combination of all three. But I say that era in general because his playing on the White Album is brilliant. His playing on All Things Must Pass is brilliant. His playing on Plastic Ono Band is brilliant.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's not at all that he became a worse drummer. In fact, there are drumming performances of his over the last 20 some odd years that I could point out and be like, look, like he's still the guy.
Yeah.
But I think with Ringo around that time, there was a shift. He went from being Ringo the Beatle to trying to carve out his own name and his own celebrity. He was doing a lot more film, and he embarked on a solo career, and he was a showman, and he was great at all those things. But that was, and yeah, he was still playing with other people, but he wasn't consistently playing with these guys who inspired them. And I think that's a big thing. The solo music is obviously amazing. I don't need to tell you that. I mean, and the best of their solo music is as good as the best Beatles music, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Truly.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were going to rank all the albums, Beatles and solo, there would be at least 3 or 4 solo records in my top 10, probably. But I'm trying to figure out how to say this without disparaging the solo music, because that's not what I'm trying to do at all. The thing that made the Beatles such a magical group was that all 3 of them had such a distinct beauty and magic to their musicality and their creativity, which makes it all the more so amazing. Like, how in the world did these 4 guys grow up in the same city and come to find each other? I mean, that's a miracle. Like, if you don't believe in miracles, it's a miracle that at least John and Paul found each other, especially, as the 2 main songwriters initially, and then the songwriter that George grew into, and the musician that George was, and the musician that Ringo was. It, again, not disparaging the solo music because it is so great, but it's not to say that there's consistently something missing. There's just a magic between those 4 guys that cannot be reproduced by any other group of people, and that includes the Beatles outside of the Beatles. And the only other, I guess, sort of comparison I can make, and this might be lost on some of the audience, I don't know how familiar you are with Jack White or the White Stripes.
I've heard a few of his songs.
Okay, so the White Stripes, their first album I think came out in '99, and they put out 6 records. Last one came out in '07. They officially broke up in 2011, but it was just Jack White and his ex-wife Meg on drums. They were the White Stripes, the duo.
Mm-hmm.
And Jack White is an extremely fascinating musician, an unbelievable musician. I'll have to send you. I mean, he's in 17,000 other groups, and there's one record in particular I think you'd love by one of his other side projects called the Rockin' Tours. And their second record, it sounds like the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, and Zeppelin all got together in the same room in 1969 and said, let's make a record together. I mean, it's like a classic rock fanboy's wet dream. Just like, oh my God, you would love it especially if you like those groups. And Jack has put out amazing solo music, and with all his other groups. And I've seen him live, I guess, 11 times, twice with the White Stripes, 3 times with this group, so on and so forth. But every time I see him solo, he'll do his solo music, and then he'll play the music he wrote with the White Stripes and Rockin' Tours or whatever. And it all sounds great. But whenever he does a White Stripes song, it sounds great. Just like it sounds, and look, I mean, when I saw Paul in '09, of course I cried when he played Blackbird. And of course, before the show, I was like, he's probably going to play Hey Jude. And then when he played Hey Jude, I was like, oh, yeah. Like, it's amazing.
Right.
But it's not, and it's not to say it's not good. It's just not the same. And that's not a disparaging comment.
No.
It doesn't, and again, it doesn't even mean, I mean, I think Ram is a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
And Ram is a record that could not have been made with John, George, and Ringo. And therein lies the other side of that argument.
Right.
Paul needed to make that record by himself, and it's brilliant because it's so unabashedly Paul. And that's great. Like, I don't think I'd want that any other way. Sorry if my video just cut out for a second.
You did.
Should be
That's
back
okay.
now. But I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say.
I know what you're saying. I agree with most of what you're saying because, I've grown to really love the individual styles of each of the 4 Beatles. And who knows, if the Beatles hadn't broken up, we might not have ever gotten the solo careers of George and Ringo and how far that took them.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'd much rather have a full album of George Harrison songs than a Beatles album with 2 George Harrison songs on it. And that's the same thing with Ringo.
Absolutely.
I'd rather have a full Ringo album than 1 Ringo song. And, they went
agree.
on to have incredible solo careers, all 4 of them. They had more success as solo artists than any band that ever broke up. And, there's so much of what they did as solo artists that I couldn't hear them doing in the Beatles. I know I've said I can't picture Paul and George backing up John on the Plastic Ono Band album. Thank God we have the Plastic Ono Band album. I can't picture John and Paul on All Things Must Pass on that album.
No.
I can picture Ringo because Ringo just, he's every man. He's there for the music first. He doesn't care.
You can't imagine George. You can't imagine George being really eager to work on For You.
No, I can't imagine John and George wanting to work on silly love songs, but I'm certainly glad that all that music came out. But sometimes when you listen to how they developed as songwriters and how distinctive each of the 4 of them are, you wonder how could they have ever been in the same band together?
Well, yeah, and even too, because I mean, there are solo songs by all 4 of them that I don't like. I mean, the Beatles are probably the only group I can think of where I like every single song. I mean, I love Bob Dylan. He's my number 2, but my least favorite Bob Dylan stuff is no. My least favorite Springsteen stuff, I don't ever need to hear again. I don't ever want to hear again. Maybe Petty has very few bad songs, if any truly bad, but even then it's like, okay, yeah, I think that John, Paul, George, and Ringo, I think there's clunkers across all of their solo careers. But I mean, firstly, that's going to be most musicians you listen to and most acts you listen to. But also, yes, the Beatles breakup in some ways is unfortunate, depending how you look at it. We're all greedy. We all want more, of course, like, you love it so much, so of course you want there to be more than just 211 songs. But also, to put it bluntly, because they broke up when they did, and to some degree, and I hate to bring this into it because John died when he did, the Beatles never had a chance to suck, and I think that's pretty cool. And honestly, and it's a shame that John Bonham passed away as young as he did, and to pass away how he did. But Zeppelin broke up, and Zeppelin never made a bad album. And maybe if they had continued, they would have eventually made a bad album. And I think there's something to be said for that. But also, yeah, if the Beatles had broken up, I mean, a lot of people don't realize they so closely associate George Harrison with the Beatles, but also with the slide guitar. It's like, show me one Beatles song that George plays slide guitar on. I don't think there is one. That is purely a George thing. And yet, when they did Free as a Bird and Real Love, when I hear Free as a Bird and he does a slide solo, sounds right to me. Doesn't sound wrong. It does sound like, yeah, if the Beatles made a record with Jeff Lynne in '94, it would sound like this. And I love it because of that. You're right. Like, we wouldn't have had that. I mean, looking how far Paul has come. I mean, there is stuff, I mean, really from Flaming Pie on, where it's like, yeah, not only could this not be Beatles music, this couldn't have been Wings. This couldn't have been anything else. And, you had asked me at some point, what my favorite McCartney solo stuff was, or what my favorite era was. And I had to do a lot of thinking on that because, there's stuff from every era that I really like. And for me, if I had to name my worst or my least favorite Paul record, the way that Paul is as a musician, even for what I consider his worst stuff, it's never uninteresting, and I think there's something to be said for that, because there's some Paul stuff I can't stand, and we don't need to go into it because we might get into a virtual fist fight over some of the stuff that I can't stand. But even the stuff of his that I'm like, I can't listen to this a single second longer, it's not because it's uninteresting. Where there are some solo George and Ringo songs that I don't care for, and some of it is because I'm like, there's nothing to me. Even having listened to this song 20, 30 times, I'm like, there's nothing about this song that interests me. There's nothing that grabs me. And that's okay, because their best stuff is the complete opposite of that. And, but for Paul, it's interesting, if I want to listen to Paul at his true height as a musician, a vocalist, a producer, yeah, I'm going to go to the 70s stuff, because that's when his voice, and I think his voice actually sounds great throughout the 80s too. I mean, there's some vocal moments on Flowers in the Dirt that I think are really amazing, but objectively, I mean, his range was just the best. But at the same time, and I do think to some degree this has to do with me growing up with Bob Dylan, because I saw Bob Dylan for the first time when I was 9 years old in 2000, to paint a picture of how young and sprightly I am. And to show that Ethan Alexanian and the kid who runs the I Know podcast are not the only young Beatles fans out there.
Hudson Ranny.
says the guy who's pushing 30 next month. But
Hmm.
I saw Dylan in 2000, and yeah, by that point, Dylan's voice had a lot of the gruff quality that it has to this day. But I was already familiar. I don't know how familiar you are with his catalog, but he put out a record in '97 called "Time Out of Mind," which
Yep.
I think most people will pinpoint as his comeback record. Even though he put out a great record in '89, then followed it up with a terrible record the year after. So, it's tough. But Time Out of Mind is kind of, I think, what most people will view as the beginning of his new modern day renaissance. And I think I've always had an appreciation from a young age of these veteran artists sort of, I guess, coming into their own in their later years, because a lot of artists do go through a period where, maybe at worst they're lost, and they're trying to figure out what the hell to do. At best, they're trying to adapt. They're trying to figure out what to do. And no one, I think maybe the only artist who ever kind of did it seamlessly was Tom Petty, because you think of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, the early classic stuff, and you think of Refugee and American Girl and Here Comes My Girl, and all the hits and all those great records that, Jimmy Iovine produced. And then he kind of went right into Full Moon Fever, which is kind of his, if you want to call it, in between years, which some people, I think, for Paul, they might, I don't necessarily, this isn't necessarily my viewpoint, but I think if you talk to most people, they'll say, yeah, well, 70s was his heyday, and then Tug of War was great, and then there was all the 80s stuff, and then he came back with Flaming Pie. So they view everything between Tug of War and Flaming Pie as the in between. And so sure, we'll for that's the viewpoint, for better or worse. I'm not saying that's what I think. I know you don't agree with that.
Absolutely not. To me, the
But
80s was his best period overall. Because to me,
and
well, I'm just going to say Tug of War, Press to Play, Flowers in the Dirt. 3 of his
those are
greatest
your
albums
three.
to me.
Yeah,
So, and then in between, all the stuff he did with Phil Ramone, which didn't get
totally.
released, which could have been
Hmm.
released. I mean, Return to
I mean,
Pepperland is brilliant.
brilliant is one word you could use for Return to Pepperland, but that's another conversation for
I
another
know.
day.
We can go off
Although
on so many tangents here. We really
we probably could. Although, as far as the Phil Ramone stuff goes, some of it I like, some of it I don't like. But for me, it's all worth it because it gave us Back on My Feet, which I think is just masterful.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, I think Petty's the only one where, like, at least the public perception, there's none of that in between. Like, he went right from that to Full Moon Fever, and then did the other Jeff Lynne record, Into the Great Wide Open, which had 2 major hits, Learning to Fly and Into the Great Wide Open, and then went right into Wildflowers, which everyone will tell you, well, Wildflowers is the beginning of his late career, the Renaissance. And it's like, well, there was no in between then. He just crushed it completely from beginning right up until he died. And but so if Paul, but I've always had an appreciation of that, because I think most artists, when they get older, and I've seen this especially with Springsteen too, I think starting with The Rising, and McCartney, and again, I'm not disparaging any of the other stuff, but I do think to a certain point, Flaming Pie is where I think he sort of reached this mindset of not necessarily not caring, because I think Paul has always cared, and I think Paul has always been very aware of what people are saying about him. But I think Flaming Pie for me is kind of the start of, the veteran phase of his career, where he's really sort of digging into, I guess, the wisdom and everything that he's taken from all of his years of making music. Because regardless, Press to Play is obviously a very divisive record. Some people, it's their, I don't know, second favorite Paul McCartney record.
That's mine. Yeah.
For some people, it's a flaming pile of garbage. I think very few people are truly in between on it. But regardless of what you think of Press to Play, I think objectively, it is a record he made. I would never say that he was lost, but I do think there was an attempt on his part. He had just done 3 records with George Martin,
right?
And the last 2 were not particularly well critically acclaimed. Pipes of Peace wasn't as acclaimed as Tug of War, and then Broad Street, had the stench of the film on it, which was trashed. And so for him, it's okay. Well, I need to move away from this. I do want to embrace this, so I will get Hugh Padgham, who has been, at least partially responsible for, Phil Collins' success, the Police's success, and regardless of whether or not you love the results like you, or you hate them like some other people, objectively, I think that is Paul kind of trying to be like, all right, what is my next move here? What am I aiming for? And I think Flaming Pie is kind of the start of him being a little more confident in those abilities again, and a little more, because even Flowers in the Dirt, which is a great record, there's 7 co-producers on that record, 8 co-producers. He was really going, like, okay, Press wasn't received well. I'm gonna write with Elvis Costello. I'm going to go on tour. I'm gonna really be Beatle Paul again. I'm going to, I'm gonna make a song like My Brave Face, which is really, really, the song Press is certainly a commercial song, but not so much. I'm sorry that my screen keeps going out. I'm trying to get my phone to charge here because, we're in a pandemic and I'm talking on the phone. My Brave Face, more so than Press, is like, okay, I'm going to try to write a big hit pop song, but one that is kind of familiar, one
it's
that
more Beatle-y.
Exactly. Yeah. Press, again, whether you like or dislike the song, objectively, it's an 80s pop song, and again, whether you like that or not, it's fine. But so for me, my favorite era of Paul, it's like, okay, well, yeah, I love the 70s, but as the person who has grown up with these veteran artists and appreciating what these veteran artists do as they get older, I mean, Dominoes is a song that I don't think Paul could have written in the 70s. Early Days is certainly not a song that Paul could have written any time before New.
Yeah.
And, some people like to flag on Early Days because of his voice. I'm like, that's what makes it great to me. And yeah, there's certain stuff, that Paul has done recently with his voice where I've been like, ooh, Paul, but, but a song like Early Days, or even a song like, man, I think Pretty Boys off McCartney 3 is such a triumph. And I love I really do. It's at worst, it's my second favorite song on the record. I love Pretty Boys. And there is that age to his voice. There's a wisdom in that voice. And I really appreciate that. So for me, it's tough to say what my favorite era is, because again, I said, well, it's either the 70s or post Flaming Pie, but I'm not trying to throw out the 80s, because if I'm making my list of top 10 favorite solo songs, I mean, Wanderlust and this one are probably making their way in there.
Yeah.
And those came out in the 80s. And, our friend Tom Hunyadi, his favorite record is Off the Ground. He loves that record. He loves every single song on it. But that for me, I mean, it's not my favorite record. It's probably not a top 10 Paul record for me, but my favorite stuff on that record, I love Wine Dark Open Sea. I love Hope of Deliverance. I love Mistress and Maid. I love the song Off the Ground. You know, those songs are fantastic. And like I said, even, you know, I'm not going to show my hand what my least favorite McCartney record is, but certainly one of my least favorite McCartney records is Give My Regards to Broad Street, and that has No More Lonely Nights on it.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, you know, like if that's the whereas my least favorite Ringo record, which again I won't show my hand on.
You can do this. I'm not going to strangle you. I can't. This is Zoom here.
Well, I'm currently, you know, and you know, hold on, my screen might go off for a second again here. Okay, I was making sure my phone's charging, but I guess I'll say it here, because maybe if I say it here and it's finally out in the public, then it means that people will hold me accountable on it. But I am writing a book that is, you know, and this is a Ken Michaels YouTube channel exclusive. You heard it here first. I am writing a book that is a ranking of all 69 solo Beatles records. So that's the other reason I don't want to show my hand too much. So we'll see. It's very much in the beginning stages. I'm currently having someone look at it to tell me if my preliminary work is awful and if I should just stop and go hole up somewhere and never show my face again, because I'd rather learn that now than get too far into it. But I will say one of my least favorite Ringo records is Ringo 2012. And there is very little or very few redeeming qualities of Ringo 2012 to me. The cover of Rock Island Line is fine. I wish it didn't have auto-tune on the vocal. I don't know. Wonderful is okay sometimes. The guitar riff to Anthem is great, but I don't know, like that to me, I guess, is what's, and I'll say some amazing things about Ringo's solo music in a second, but that to me is what makes Paul's solo music so fascinating, is that regardless of whatever you think is the worst record, you can't tell me there's not something interesting on it, or I think there's something good on all of them. But there's definitely something interesting, whether or not you like any of it.
I'll agree with you on that. But there's so many things you just said in the last half hour I wanted to bounce off of, but you were just on a roll, so I just let you
I'm
keep
so
talking.
sorry.
That's okay.
Listen, I've been holed up with the same person for a year, so when I see someone else, I'm like, here's everything I've been thinking for the last year that my fiance does not need to hear. Because she doesn't care about Ringo bringing in 4 producers for Time Takes Time. She doesn't care about the difference between the album version of Pretty Little Head and the single version. She wants nothing to do with it. She wants to watch whatever show she's watching on Netflix and hopefully have to hear from me as little as possible. So I'm just going to talk too much.
But, you know, I'll just say a few things on some of what you brought up. But when I look at that 80s period for Paul, I think after Broad Street, see, he had spent the entire decade of the 70s where he pretty much produced everything himself, except for, you know, George Martin with Live and Let Die. And actually, George Martin did a little bit more than that when you consider working on the arrangements of Uncle Albert, Albemarle Halsey, which he never gets the credit for. And up until recently, I didn't even know that he worked on some of the arrangement of Little Lamb Dragonfly, but that was also from the Ram album. It's in the box set.
But, okay. And then I don't think any of the Glenn Johns stuff made the record, right?
For what?
Any of the initial work off of Red Rose?
No, I don't think so.
So then it wasn't until Chris Thomas, I guess.
Yeah. So he had Chris Thomas relying on an old pal from the old days who just happened to be hitting it big around then. It's kind of the start of using contemporary producers who were big at the time. So after that, and then tried and true, George Martin for 3 albums, where is he going to go? Is he going to produce himself again, or does he want to lighten the load as a producer? And if so, who do you turn to? Well, Hugh Padgham was hot. at the time.
Yep.
And it started this whole trend of working with producers who are hot at the moment. And you got a lot of fans out there that are going to say, well, he's just trying to be relevant. He's trying to be contemporary. And a lot of fans don't care for that. They'd much rather have Paul go back to his roots, do more simpler production, hence
Mm.
all the great reviews of McCartney 3. And not only that, but Flaming Pie, much more simpler production, chaos and
Mm-hmm.
creation, simpler production, but not using a Hugh Padgham or a David Kahn or, all the people, Brian Tedder
Yeah.
recently, someone like that, Greg Kirsten, you name it, the producers that
Jeff
were on
Lynne.
New, Jeff Lynne.
Yeah.
I don't feel that much of a presence of Jeff Lynne on Flaming Pie.
You
I
know
really
what's
don't.
funny? It's funny because I always felt kind of similar. I mean, there's certain little things, little thing here and there in like The World Tonight. I'm like, oh yeah, there's
A
Jeff,
little
sure,
bit, a little bit.
but a little bit. But it's funny because I always thought like, yeah, I don't really feel Jeff all that much on Flaming Pie, except for Young Boy. I really hear it on Young Boy, and then I look at the credits. I'm like, he didn't even do that. That's Steve Miller.
Yeah.
That's him
Oh,
and Steve
okay.
Miller. Like, I know. I think that's the most Jeff Lynne sounding song on the record. Jeff Lynne had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
It's funny, and well, finish your thought because I have a thought too. I don't want to cut you
No,
off.
it's just you compare Flaming Pie to Cloud Nine, and it's a
Mhm.
world of difference between the production of
Yeah,
Jeff Lynne. You know,
totally.
I really don't feel Jeff Lynne that much on Flaming Pie.
I don't, and it's funny because I know exactly what you're saying, and you've talked a lot about younger generations seeming to prefer like stripped down organic
Yep.
things.
Uh-huh.
And I think that, it depends on what demographic exactly you're talking about, because the flip side of that argument is that I've noticed, especially listening to a lot of new music and certainly, being in the music industry and having friends around my age who are musicians, a lot of modern musicians, not just mainstream, but underground too, and otherwise, like really experimenting with synthesizers, certain 80s style production techniques. But as it pertains to Beatles fans, I can understand why if a younger fan who maybe is just getting into music in general and they're getting into the Beatles and they hear something like Rubber Soul or Abbey Road, they might initially prefer the production of an album like McCartney or Ram to a press to play or something like that, or
Mm-hmm.
even like the big conversation, Double Fantasy or Double Fantasy stripped down.
Mm-hmm.
Like I grew up, the first solo Lennon I heard was the John Lennon Collection compilation.
Okay.
So and most of it, I think like 5 of his 7 Double Fantasy songs are on there. So I grew up very accustomed to that and used to that. So, I think the stripped down is fascinating. And there are times where I go back to it, but, I prefer the original mix still. But I think that for me personally, I am generally drawn to music that feels, I think, quote unquote, real, and
Uh-huh.
music that has space to it. And so like for me, I do have a harder time, I think, with the 80s aesthetic, because some of that, and there are so many I can hardly even call it a rule because there are so many exceptions to it.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it does feel kind of cold to me, like there's a plasticity or an inauthenticity to it. And it has nothing to do with how good the musician might be, how good the song might be. Because I've also heard you say a bunch of times, like, I don't, not that you don't care about the production, but you listen for the song, and the production is
First.
secondary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the song, and yes, and I understand that, and I agree with that, and I think that is a reason why, like, even if it took me a while to like some of the stuff on like Born in the USA, or a song like Don't Come Around Here No More, you know, some stuff that sounds very 80s. It's like being able to be patient and like listen to, like, okay, if I'm not inherently crazy about the big gated echoey drums or the synthesizers, like, okay, well, listen past it. Do I like the song? No. Okay, well, screw it. I don't need to listen to it. And then if it's yes, it's like, okay, do I like the song enough to listen to this version of it or this production of it? Or is there a demo or a different version, you know, that I might appreciate more? But, you know, and even the artists I love the most who came into relevance in the 80s, you know, like U2 or REM or the Replacements, I think that those artists, you know, there's elements of that, but I like music, I think, that has some space to it. And I think that is maybe generally what it is. But funnily enough, you say, yeah, I've heard that too. Like, oh, I like it better when Paul produces himself. You know, I don't want Greg Kurstin or Ryan Tedder. And it's like, okay, well, the last record before McCartney 3 of original music that he produced by himself was London Town. Every other one since then, he's had a co-producer.
McCartney
I mean,
2.
there's the okay, yes,
Yeah.
all right, McCartney 2.
And well, the Russian album.
The Russian
I
album
know it's
of original
covers.
music.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And that, I mean, and I have a nostalgic, or I have a emotional sort of attachment to the Russian album because it's one of the first solo Paul things I ever heard. But I mean, that was him blowing off steam, and they happened to hit record, and then it was good enough, like, yeah, we'll give it to Russia so they don't have to keep importing everything. And then Russia finally got everything, so he's like, yeah, all right, we'll give it to the rest of the world too. I mean, not to say it's not good, but like, it shows you what Paul thought of that record or how he valued it, you know.
But there are fans that prefer him to do stuff like that. That's very off the cuff and spontaneous. And
absolutely. But those are the same fans who say like, oh, well, Chaos and Creation is the best thing he's done. Now, I love Chaos and Creation. Chaos and Creation is, if not a 5-star record for me, right on the cusp. That's Nigel Godrich. I mean, that, and the reason that record is so good, I think, is because I think it's the one time in his solo career that he was truly, I think, pushed outside of his comfort zone and didn't push back. Because I do think that Padgham pushed him outside his comfort zone, but Paul co-produced that record. Paul was going for a particular thing with that. Chaos and Creation was very much, not to say, I mean, Paul's going to have his hand in everything that he does. I mean, you know, David Kahn is listed as the only producer on Driving Rain, but there's certain songs on that record where I'm like, this is Paul. I mean, Your Way. Paul's been writing Your Way since 1968. It's just been a bunch of, and I love all, you know, I love Mama's Little Girl. I love Country Dreamer. I love Heart of the Country.
It's very much like that. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, Chaos and Creation, and this isn't at all to say that Paul wouldn't be capable of doing it. But I listened to a song like How Kind of You, which is a top 5 solo McCartney song for me. The soundscape of that production. Now McCartney, obviously, I mean, he's been doing tape loops since the 60s. It's not to say he's not, you know, adept at that, and certainly everything he's done with the Firemen. Paul wouldn't have made How Kind of You if he didn't have Nigel Godrich. That was not, Nigel heard that song and said, okay, we're going to turn this thing on its side. And a lot of my favorite modern groups are groups that do that. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the band Wilco at all.
Sure. Some of their stuff.
But I mean, so much of their stuff is brilliant, but I mean, their most famous record is a record called Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. And there's a documentary of the making of that record where they basically, you know, they learn all the songs and they build up arrangements for them. And then after they build up the arrangements, they basically say like, all right, we're going to take a wrecking ball to this thing and we're going to break it up. And you see them rehearsing the songs and you hear it on the record and you go, how the hell? It's kind of like when you listen to, Tomorrow Never Knows from Anthology and go, how did they get from there to this?
Right.
And so it's funny that people say, well, I like it when Paul produces himself and does more stuff. But it's like, okay, but the stuff that you like, I mean, that's Nigel. And then, yeah, you say you love Flaming Pie, and certainly Paul had a hand in making that, but Jeff Lynne was helping him, George Martin was helping him, Steve Miller was helping him. And granted, I love McCartney 3, and I do love that Paul produced it himself, because I do think that it's fascinating and refreshing to hear what is in this guy's head when he's not being influenced by other people. Not to say that other people can't influence him in a great way. I'm sure that Greg Kurstin had a lot of great ideas that made some of the songs on Egypt Station better. And all the producers on New, which I think is a very consistent record. But
I agree.
Paul is such a fascinating mind and a musician, and that is what I love about McCartney 3. It's like, yeah, this is him without any of that outside. It's not to say that is better necessarily. If you like it better, then that's great, but it's just different, and I think that's awesome. And if I'm being honest, it's a big reason why I kind of wish that Ringo would do something different, because he's been doing basically the same thing since Why Not, which has been, I'm going to get together with whoever will have me. And that's fine. And that has produced some really great music. But man, I had a dream earlier in quarantine that T-Bone Burnett was producing a Ringo record, and it was all cover songs. And I don't, I think it's great that Ringo has blossomed as a songwriter, really, especially since teaming up with, the team of Mark Hudson and Dean Gricol and Steve Dudas, and then continuing that even after the Roundheads broke up. But Ringo, it's not to disparage that, but Ringo is such a great interpreter. And there's times with Ringo, and I know that this is a very cliche opinion, it's like, man, it's not that I'm not all about peace and love. I am all about peace and love.
Just a little tired of it.
But I don't need back-to-back Thank God for Music and Send Love, Spread Peace on the same record, because there's 5 albums in a row now of that back-to-back. It's like, I would love to hear Ringo either team up with someone who will push him outside his comfort zone again as a writer, or at the very least as a producer. Not
but
to say,
you don't think that all the different people that he's written with have had an influence on him as a songwriter? I mean, there's a lot of work he's done. I love the stuff he's written, say, with Richard Marx, or Van Dyke Parks. They're all different between that and Dave Stewart and Gary Burr, and
they are all different. But do you personally, and this isn't to say that whether you like them or not, because again, there are songs on all of these records I like, but all the Why Not, Postcards, Give More Love, that, do you actually hear growth as a songwriter from Ringo? Because I don't, and that's not to say that it's bad. There's very few songs, and when I say growth as a songwriter, I mostly am talking lyrically, because musically, I think there's some pretty fascinating musical stuff on Why Not. The last few records, there's some great music, but it's pretty, I think, standard, which is that's not a knock, that's not a negative thing, but it's rock and roll, a lot of blues forms and whatnot. But
Time, because on Why Not is a very interesting track. That doesn't sound. I was just
gonna say,
yeah.
And for anyone who says
anything else that he put out.
Talk about Ringo as a drummer. I mean, the drumming on I could go off on that song for a while, but we'd be here for a minute. But I love that song. But I don't hear growth as a songwriter, or I hate to say it, I view Ringo in his solo career. When he started with working with Mark Hudson, Ringo grew as an artist because he had a producer and a team around him who were able to simultaneously say, hey, yeah, Ringo, like, you know, what was Paul's comment when he heard what in the world? Hey, you're an effing Beatle. Like, this sounds like the effing Beatles. I think Paul said something like that to him. They weren't afraid to go down that road, but they weren't afraid to start making stuff like Instant Amnesia, which for
Yes.
my money is the most musically fascinating thing he has ever done in his solo career, bar none. Nothing comes close. Not to say it's his best solo song or anything, but from a musically fascinating standpoint, it's Instant Amnesia. And that's because he had guys around him who were simultaneously willing to say, like, hey man, you can play into the Beatles stuff, but like let's have some fun, let's experiment, let's explore. And you know, let's write. There's some decent lyrical songs over the last few records, but again, going back to like Ringo Rama, I look at a song like Love First, Ask Questions Later, you know, and a lyric like was it nothing but joy in the tears we cry, nothing but light all around us, trust in each other as years go by, now that forever has bound us. Like, oh my God, like when I listen to that song and then I listen to like the song Postcards from Paradise, I go, what happened? Like what, you know? And so for me, it's like, well, if we're calling a spade, Ringo's 80. He's probably not thinking, what's going to be my next big musical reinvention? But, you know, as someone who really likes those Mark Hudson records,
me too.
I also understand the argument of, well, maybe it did need to stop when it, regardless of whether they had a falling out or not, maybe he needed to do something different. So why isn't anyone saying that now? And I get that maybe he's technically doing something different with the EPs, and we're recording this the day before Zoom In comes out. But he's not. He's been doing the same thing, like approach-wise, in terms of working with these songs. And again, you're right. I mean, working with Van Dyke. I mean, Van Dyke Parks and Ringo gave us "Walk with You," which is a triumph. I'm not disparaging any of it. I mean, even the last record, I was so, and I feel like no one talked about it. But I thought It's Not Love That You Want. I'm like, this is the best song on the record. I'm like lyrically, melodically, how that shifts, like the production on this song. I'm like, yeah, Ringo, like that's 2 thumbs up. That's 2 peace of loves for me. But
well, you know, the one thing that you have to bring up when it comes to all these songs, and even going back to Ringo writing with Vinnie Poncia, because I've interviewed Ringo a few times. I'm always bringing up his songwriting, but he never lets you know with any of these songs what exactly his contribution was or what his songwriting partners were. So when it comes to all these lyrics, how much of it was Mark Hudson and Gary Burr and all these people and everybody since the Mark Hudson days? And believe me, I agree with you. The albums with Mark Hudson and Time Takes Time, aside from the Ringo album, to me are the best albums from Ringo's solo career. And I think all the albums since with Mark Hudson have some really outstanding tracks. I love the production, but there's a sameness to the production. It's all very bright. And
it's all
but
very
but the drumming is outstanding, and that's part of what I love about those albums, because you can just zero in on the drumming. You can hear them so much clearer than Beatle records in the past. You know,
absolutely.
You know, so
I do wish he would. And I've heard some people say they don't notice it, and I've heard some people say they notice it and it doesn't bother them. And to each their own. I'm not here to disparage anyone's opinion, but for me, starting with the Liverpool 8 record, really, he's really embraced putting auto-tune on his voice. And obviously there's some stuff, like obviously his version of Money off the last record, where he really lays into it, but it's very obvious to me across all those records. Like, you know, and I don't think you necessarily need to have a musician's ear to hear it. I'm like, yeah, he's tuning his vocal, but I think he doesn't need to, because no one's gonna confuse Ringo for a world-class vocalist, but Ringo has so much character to his voice. And when I hear him sing and when the auto tune kicks in, it takes out that character for me. So like, I mean, for me, I have a few issues with the song in general, and I know that we're going to disagree here. And
Yes.
like you say, and that's okay. Um, but one of the many reasons I can't listen to Here's to the Nights, you know, off
Hmm.
of the Zoom EP coming out tomorrow, is the fact that I'm like, well, it sounds like it wasn't a great vocal take to begin with. And then when they slather the auto tune on it, like it doesn't sound like Ringo. Whereas when I listen to, you know, something like Choose Love, and I'm sure there's some vocal tuning on it, but there's a way to tune vocals without making it sound auto tune. There's a difference between auto tune, then there's a thing called melodyne, and there's all these different vocal pitching and tuning things.
Hmm.
I don't even know all the differences. But when I listen to an album like Choose Love or Vertical Man, or even Time Takes Time, I actually think Old Wave is a good vocal record for him too. But
Hmm.
I think Time Takes Time is the beginning of a run of few albums, kind of like you said, where especially his voice sounds confident because he's not, there's some songs on those late 70s, early 80s records where I do think he's trying a little too hard, singing outside of his range, really straining. He becomes really confident in his baritone range. He sounds strong. I think getting sober really helped with that because
Hmm.
drinking a lot will damage your vocal cords, as can be heard on some of those records. And
But you know, some of those songs, it does add character to them. I mean,
oh, I mean,
like Gave It All Up is the great
I think
example. You know.
that's my favorite song on Ringo the Fourth. And actually, I think my current favorite song on Stop and Smell the Roses is the de facto title track, Stop and Take the Time. And yeah,
Hmm.
I agree that gruffness gives it the quality. But I think Ringo's voice, I just want to hear his voice. I don't want to hear it tuned up. And I don't care if it's perfect. I mean, look, Paul's voice isn't perfect.
Hmm.
And but Paul is cool because Paul has utilized auto tune in the past. There's a way to utilize it in an artistic way, like the beginning of Caesar Rock, how he's using it. He's using the auto tune as a, you know, the Caesar
I didn't
Rock
know he was
right
using
before.
it there.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah,
Hmm.
you if you listen really closely to that, and then you know, there's the obvious stuff like your favorite song, Feet in the Clouds. You know, when he's doing the
Right.
you know, but using it as an instrument. And again, whether you like it or not, that's one thing. But Ringo is using it very much like, I'll throw this on to make my voice sound a little bit better. I
Hmm.
don't think he needs to, and I don't think he should. Like, my dream was that T-Bone Burnett was producing a Ringo's cover record, and like he was picking out like these different blues songs and these different folk songs. And I'm like, again, I don't want to disparage Ringo's songwriting. I hope Ringo keeps writing. I hope that eventually he teams up with some different songwriters, because again, whether you like the Van Dyke Park stuff or the Richard Marx stuff or the Lukather stuff, that's fine. But I think he just needs to get with someone new just to spice it up a little bit. But man, I like, do you know anyone who knows T-Bone? Because I have a track listing planned out. Like I've already figured out, well, this is what Ringo's vocal range is right now. So if he sang it in this key, it would be
Hmm.
perfect. I have it all planned out, Ken. It's going to be great. It's never going to happen, but it will be great.
I've thought about certain songs that I wish Ringo covered that I thought he'd do a good job on because he did have
Yeah.
success in the '70s with you know, You're
Oh my
16 and
God.
Only You.
I
So
love Only You,
yeah.
especially. Yeah.
Anyway,
But
but
anyway,
yeah,
what
the
were we
thing
talking
about
about?
the songwriting, like I said, I wish I could really get down and dirty there with Ringo and find out what did he write on each song. He's never really revealed that, and you know, I'm sure he's played a part in every single song that he's co-written, but did he write the melody? How much of the words are his? You don't really know.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. But I do like this worthwhile material on all those post Mark Hudson albums. And
Except
you
for
know,
Ringo 2012, I agree. Yeah.
all right, that's okay.
Rock Island Line is fine. I'll give him that.
Only the
Maybe if
covers.
think maybe if Think It Over didn't have the steel drums on it, but that's more my Buddy Holly
Hmm.
fandom. The
Okay.
steel drums, I have a anyway.
So going back on auto tune. So you're okay with Paul when he uses it for Nothing for Free or for you, the Ryan Tedder stuff.
I like Nothing for You.
Nothing for free.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do like. Yeah, sorry, yeah, Nothing for Free. I do like Nothing for You, I guess, would be the mashup of those two. But yeah, I like Nothing for Free because people, again, and I'm not lumping you in with this because you very clearly have the intelligence, patience, and palate to, seek out and appreciate both music of different genres and of different eras. But there are people, and a lot of, I guess, classic rock people, they hear certain things and they just sort of spout it off like, yeah, there's no good music past 1983 or something. So we're like, oh yeah, all this new pop crap and all this auto tune, and they don't really reckon, but they might buy a new album by one of their favorite artists without realizing, like, yeah, there's probably some vocal tuning on that record. A lot of artists do it. They might not need to, but a lot of them do it in ways you would never expect. Like, it's amazing because not everything sounds like Believe by Cher.
Right.
Not everything sounds like Ringo's version of Money. It can be done very subtly. But it can also, like, when it is used, I think, as an instrument, again, kind of like a vocoder. I mean, people don't mind listening to some music from the 70s and 80s where the vocoder is being used. I'm like, that's kind of how people are using auto tune. And again, if you don't like it, that's totally fine.
That was a vocoder on Pipes of Peace, right? Towards the end, all those different notes that Paul's hitting. Wasn't that a vocoder?
I do believe so. And then there's one of the 70s hits has a vocoder on it too.
You mentioned Feet in the Clouds. I thought that was a vocoder.
It might be. Yeah. That's the thing. It's like, but people, and even I hear it in my head like, oh, well, it's tuning because, he's singing, but it's being tuned, whether that is through the vocoder or through a computer program or whatever it is. But like, it's just one of those things where it's like, it kind of is a case by case thing. Like, some people like to make broad generalizations like, well, I don't like music. Like, I was in the jazz program at the University of Rhode Island, and one of my friends was so steadfast. He's like, I don't like jazz with vibraphones in it. I'm like, well, that's a really broad statement to make. Because maybe in general, like, because I would say in general, like, I don't like heavy metal music. I don't like offshoots of, whether it's sludge or post-core, like all these, that's not really my thing. But every now and then it's like there's a group called Mastodon. Someone will play me something by them, or even like an early Metallica song. It's like, I don't like Metallica. I've never liked Metallica. I probably never will like Metallica. But every now and then I'll hear something and be like, that's kind of cool. They really I like how they did that there. It's okay, I guess, to have preferences. Like, even for me, I became really upset, and this is probably another thing we'll disagree with, but I'll at least explain myself. I really got into the blues through this 5-disc box set that my dad had. And it was just a bunch of compilations with a bunch of the old school Chicago blues guys, guys like Little Walter, Otis Rush, and then even Sonny Boy Williamson, and then even some stuff that was more reminiscent of the early, like, 1910s, 20s, 30s, Charlie Patton, Robert Johnson, things like that.
Yeah.
And man, I love that stuff. It scratches a certain itch for me. And I would say that after listening to a lot of blues and understanding what I like about blues music, I would probably venture to say that I don't like 90 to 95% of blues that has horns in it, because most of the time, 90 to 95% of the time, to me, it feels so gawky and forced. especially when it's like a big brass band, like bum, 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 bum,
Mm.
bum, bum, like the big Room Full of Blues stuff. And I shouldn't say that because I'm from Rhode Island and Room Full of Blues is Rhode Island royalty. And, but like, it's too much for me. Like, but again, there's this exception. I mean, you listen to BB King utilized horns a lot and really great. There's some stuff that's all like, I don't think you can just say like, well, I don't like this, like, because there's almost always an exception. Like, yeah, I could name off a bunch of artists right now that I don't like, and probably some unpopular opinions in there, but every single one of them, I can name at least one song, but I'm like, oh, but that one's great. And I just feel like it's all about having an open mind. And I feel so with McCartney, it's like, I'm not going to go into a McCartney record and say, well, I hope that this sounds like Band on the Run, or even I hope this sounds like Flaming Pie, or I hope this sounds like Egypt Station. I'm not even going to go into it and say, I hope this sounds like a Paul McCartney record, because what is a Paul McCartney record? McCartney 2 is vastly different from Kisses on the Bottom, which is vastly different from Wings at the Speed of Sound, which is different from New. Like, they're all, I don't listen to music. When I listen to the Beatles or Paul McCartney or anyone, I don't listen to it necessarily. And again, there are exceptions and times we've talked about where we let things affect us, but I listen to it as a fan of music. Like, I like music, and some people will say like, oh, well, I don't like this Paul song because, it doesn't have any of this or doesn't sound like this. I'm like, yeah, but it's good. Who cares if it doesn't sound like anything else? I mean, like, I think that's such a, I think, I don't want to offend anyone, and I don't want to put down anyone's opinions, but I think that's such a stupid sort of expectation to have of something. Why would you throw out something like, oh, well, I hate Rinse the Raindrops because it doesn't sound like Listen to What the Man Said. It's like, well, have you ever thought about the fact you could like both, or you could not like Rinse the Raindrops, but not because you're comparing it to what you think this artist is supposed to sound like? I don't know. I just don't think that should be a qualification for anyone. But
It scares me how much you think like me.
and it would scare you how much I think like you and how differently we feel on certain things. I'm sure.
But that's cool. But I'm the same way with that, because if Paul puts out a new album, I'm not thinking to myself, how is this compared to the last album? How is this compared to Flowers in the Dirt, to Band on the Run, to the Beatles? I don't care. I only care about, do I like it?
Of
And
course.
for me, I find it more fascinating whenever Paul does something that he's never done before. If he's worked with a different producer, that producer can bring out something in him that you haven't heard in previous albums. To me, that's growth. I think sometimes Paul's far more affected by the producers that work with him than with the musicians that work with him. I think they have more of an influence to his overall sound and the arrangements of his songs. I could be wrong, but
I think a lot of people misunderstand Paul, and it's funny because I've been going on this huge deep dive. I've always, I mean, as long as I've been listening to the Beatles, I've been listening to their solo music, but my real deep dive into their solo catalog began a few years ago when I really dove headfirst. And since doing so, in some ways I've become, I hate to say, a McCartney apologist, because I've always loved Paul McCartney. But I do think that there are certain perceptions of him that are out there that I don't agree with. And even certain things that I think are true, I still don't think people truly understand, because Paul is always going to think about, to some degree, his idea of success, which is being on the charts, having a hit. I mean, he said it he said so as much 3 years ago when him and Ryan Tedder got together. He said, I want to make a hit. So they wrote
Right.
it for you. And he absolutely has it. And he is 100% so many times written and produced things with the sole intention of like, I'm trying to write a hit here. I'm trying to write something really commercial and really poppy. But at the same time, it's also the same guy who goes back to his recordings from a year earlier and hears bogey music and says, yeah, I'll put that on my next record.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's the same guy who does jam for 25 minutes on Rinse the Raindrops and gives it to the producer and says, find the best 10 minutes of this.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we'll close out the record like that, you know, or he'll do the stuff with youth. And the thing is, I think what that all boils down to, both and you could kind of look at both of those aspects as being polar opposites, but they're not. They come from, I think, one major thing, which is that the guy loves music.
Mm-hmm.
He is just all about music. And yeah, you know, John, even if John had lived, and even when he made a comeback, like I don't know how prolific he would have been. And George certainly didn't care about being prolific at the end of his life. And that's fine, because John Lennon and George Harrison were very different people, and they didn't love music any less than Paul. They just had a different relationship to it, and they had, you know, different viewpoints on what else they wanted to do. Paul, it's just the way he is, though. He has to keep going. He has to keep creating. It was the same way that Johnny Cash was. I mean, it's the same way that Willie Nelson's always been. And so you're going to get both of that. And sometimes you're going to hear it and you're going to think, wow, Paul, you hear something like For You or Press, whether you like them or not, you think like, hey man, you weren't happy. You didn't happen to try to write like a radio hit here, were you? But
I don't see anything wrong with that, though.
If it's good, there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
You know, that's all that matters. And if you don't like it, that's also fine. But I've become a McCartney apologist because I do think that some people, yeah, they have that image of him like, well, Paul's the entertainer and Paul's the showman, and he wasn't the music, he wasn't the artist. That's the word they use. Like, well, John and George, they were the artists. And I'm like, you don't get it. Like,
No.
yes, they're different. I will give you that. And there are aspects of John Lennon and George Harrison's musicality and artistry that I do love because they are different, or I love them, quote unquote. I don't want to say more than Paul's. I love them for different reasons. You know, I don't think Paul would ever write a song like Life Itself. I don't want to say he couldn't write a song like Life Itself, but I really feel like that's George, and only John to me could write Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out.
Uh-huh.
You know, those are, like you said, they grew into their own. And I really don't know if either of those guys, like you said, like if they could have written, maybe, I don't know, just pulling songs out of my head. I don't know if they could have written a song like
You would just
Beautiful Night.
Yeah.
You know?
That when it comes to really deeply personal songs, I don't think that John and George could write The End of the End, which I think is
No,
one of the greatest. That is a masterpiece from Paul's
it's a
solo
complete
career.
masterpiece. And that being said, and this is the other thing, I also think that people don't understand Paul because they look at him and they look at his lyrics and they think, well, this guy wasn't personal. And I think that's another misconception, because I feel like if you listen to the first McCartney album, yeah, lyrically, you know, there's things in Every Night and Man We Was Lonely and Maybe I'm Amazed where you can hear what his mindset is. But it's more so the sound of that record. It's more so how that record is put together. Like, he doesn't need to do it lyrically. But that being said, if you had to put together an album spanning Paul's entire career of personal confessional lyrics, like, you might have enough for a single record.
Oh, I think there's more than that.
Maybe, but John and George, almost every song, there's some element of like, wow, you know. It doesn't mean I like all those songs, and it doesn't mean that is every song, but like that was the type of songwriting they excelled at. But that's what I appreciate it, you know. Bob Dylan, I would say, is my favorite songwriter of all time, because I think when I hear the term songwriting, my initial reaction is to think of lyrics, and I do think that Dylan is the greatest lyricist ever. But I mean, if I'm talking the greatest songwriters of all time, I'm going to talk about Paul McCartney. And yeah, I know that I'm talking about the guy who wrote I Was Talking to an Eskimo, said he was hoping for a fall, but like, that's not what it's about. Because if that's what it was about, then Junior's Farm wouldn't be a top 10 McCartney song for me, which it is.
Right. For me too. Yep. That's
So
the
good.
thing. It's so complicated when you're talking about
Yeah.
songwriting. I mean, there are songs, I believe, like John Lennon said, Paul can write great lyrics when he wants to.
Oh
And there
yeah.
are times when he doesn't put the effort in, but you can like so much else behind the music. I mean, we just did a show on Talk More Talk, and we were talking about favorite songs from the solo careers, and for some reason, Kid O'Toole brought up That Would Be Something, which to me,
Mm.
you know, compositionally is not much. It's a couple of lines in there, but it's what he does to the song, his vocals, the hot bass, the sloppy drums, whatever it does, you know, you know. So if you love it, fine. There's no reason. Some
Absolutely.
people love bip bop, you know, and at the same
I
time,
love Big
he's
Pop.
written great lyrics like the end of the end.
Like
While we were
Dominoes,
singing,
you know.
yeah, you know, there's so
Mm-hmm.
much, you know, that he's done where
Yeah.
if you really pay attention, there'll be a great line here and there, or an entire set of lyrics that will floor you. It can happen.
Well, sure. I mean, you know, and I'm gonna so our friends at, you know, the Two Legs podcast have been doing their weekly song rankings of all the
Hmm.
records, and also then after each decade doing all the B-sides. And I've been tuning in, and I gotta tell you, Ken, if I went through every record and gave you my rankings, like there would be, like, if anyone has any mob connections, I would have so many hits out on me. Like for almost every record, people would be like, what? Because I, you know, I won't give anything away, but I will say I was watching it last night. They were doing all the '80s singles and B-sides, and so you know, I always like to make my list to see if I can compare. And I wrote it down in the comments, and I'll say it out loud, and I'll get eviscerated by so many people for this. But there was something like 24 songs. I would say Once Upon a Long Ago is my number 17. Um, I can't stand Once Upon a Long Ago. I
Oh,
don't.
oh.
I I've never. And to be honest, there's other Paul songs that I don't love that are popular, but I get it. You know, it's just like it's not my thing, but I totally get why people like this song. And for Once Upon a Long Ago, just for me personally, when I hear that song, and this is just my opinion, I hear not great lyrics. I hear a production that I don't enjoy. I hear music that I don't enjoy. I hear melodies that I don't find particularly enjoyable. It is almost the aspects of Paul McCartney's solo career that I don't like, almost all of it is in that song. Okay, so that was my number 17. Then when I got
Well,
to my top
we
10,
disagree on this, but just let
I
me ask
know,
you
I
one
know.
thing about that song. The whole middle bit where there's all these harmonies and melodies going on at the same time, doesn't that impress you?
I well, the
All the
term
effort put in behind
impress,
that?
that's a thing. I've come to a point because to some degree, you know, we're all music snobs to some degree, but especially for me, you know, growing up and then being a musician, I mean, I was such an asshole sometimes. I mean, telling people like, this is what's right and this is what's wrong. And like, now that I'm approaching the ripe old age of 30, I'm recognizing like, hey, you know, It is all subjective. And the thing is, it's like,
It
I
is.
think about artists who I don't like, and I'm like, but if that artist changed somebody's life, who am I to tell them that they're wrong? You
Right.
know, I can't stand Jimmy Buffett, but like, oh my God, if you're a parrot head and being a parrot head changed your life, like, God bless you. That's awesome. You
Mm,
know? And so, but a big part of that I would say is being able to start differentiating. Cause I used to say all the time, like, this sucks, this sucks. I hate this, I hate this. But then recognizing, like, okay, what don't I like about it?
mm,
And sometimes you can think and think and think and overthink all you want, when sometimes the answer is just like, I just don't really like it. It doesn't sound good to me.
mm,
But if you take the time to try and understand it, which most people don't do,
mm,
it can actually help you potentially like something you might not like. At the very least, help you appreciate something you might not like. At
mm.
best, it might teach you to like something. So for me, when you say that doesn't impress you, it's not that it's not objectively impressive or objectively good, but I don't like the sound of it. It doesn't do anything for me emotionally,
Mm.
uh, or kinesthetically. It does nothing for me. I much prefer the harmonies at the beginning of Flying to My Home. Those are more impressive to
That's
me.
amazing.
It is amazing. So that being said, I know, I mean, Andy had it as his number one once upon a long ago. I'm not going to take that away from him. I'm
Mm.
not going to take it. I know I'm in the minority. I'm not going to take it away from anyone else.
Uh-huh.
It's just not for me. And hell, there were 7 other ones I had below it. And we'll talk about PS Let Me Do another day. But for me, then when I got to my top 10, and this is another one, I'm like, okay, I have Once Upon a Long Ago at 17. And my number 5 is I Want to Cry, which is a completely lazy 12 bar blues, nothing to it. The lyrics are not impressive, but I like it. I like, I like that he's clearly having fun. It's off the
Mm,
cut. Yeah, no one's gonna mistake Paul McCartney for a grizzled old authentic bluesman.
mm,
Um, but it feels real to me, quote unquote real. It
mm.
feels organic. And yeah, the blues isn't his strong suit, but I would rather hear Paul McCartney and a pretty good band, mind you, because that's the Russian album sessions.
Right.
So, that's either Chris Whitten or Henry Spinetti on drums. You got Mick Gallagher in there on keys. You got Mick Green playing. You got a great band,
Mm.
capable musicians playing a pretty damn good blues song. So yeah, compositionally, Once Upon a Long Ago kicks the hell out of I Want to Cry,
Sure.
but I really like I Want to Cry. I'd rather listen to that.
Mm.
And it ended up being my number 5, and that's the funny thing. And this book I'm writing right now, there will be a prologue, which I'm gonna try to hammer home as much as possible. Like, this is my opinion.
Mm.
And the thing about opinions, they're funny because they don't matter, but they're also extremely important, because music is a part of the thread that makes us as people, as
Mm.
music fans. Like,
Right.
music is such a big part of our lives, and knowing what we like and understanding what we like and how that affects us and what that gives to us. I mean, your personal opinion is the most important thing. And to be able to talk with other people about their opinions and to be able to truly listen and understand, whether or not you end up completely agreeing or disagreeing, it doesn't matter. But I can't tell you how many times I've been able to go back and fall in love with something I didn't like before, or at least appreciate it, because
Yeah.
I had someone else tell me and go back and listen to this and check this out.
Right.
That's so important. But at the same time, I could sit here and tell you, like, hey Ken, Once Upon a Long Ago sucks.
Mm.
But that doesn't matter, because you like it and you like it.
Mm.
What does my opinion matter to you? The only thing it can matter is maybe I'll tell you something where you'll go back and say, I'll have to listen for that next time. And maybe you'll
See,
understand your own opinion more.
opinions matter a lot to me.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter whether it's an opinion that I agree with, as long as it's an educated opinion.
sure.
When people will rate an album after hearing it once or twice, go away from me, please. Nobody can judge an album after one or two listens.
No,
Nobody has
no.
that built-in quality where they know how they're going to feel for eternity about a certain album, and opinions can change over time. And
Oh yeah.
that's what I went through this just now with McCartney 3, where there's so many people that are rushing online. They've got to say what they feel about it. How about a year later? How do you feel? That
Yeah.
might mean a little bit more to me than all the songs are in my head right now. It's the greatest album I've ever heard. I've got to say that. And they've already ranked, all 30 plus albums of McCartney after 1 week of McCartney 3 coming out. So,
You have to live
I
with
love
it.
to see, I love seeing this. I love seeing the excitement and the
Yeah.
passion from fans. But still, I'll listen to anyone that truly knows the music like you do. And I don't have to agree with
Yeah.
a lot of what you say. And that's fine. But and there's so many people that really don't know the solo music and make
Yeah.
judgment calls on it. And I have to deal with
Yeah.
that all the time on social media. Again, I don't expect them to agree with me. Just take the time to listen, before you say
Take
anything.
exactly. And yeah, and there's so many records that I've listened to once and I didn't like it. And then I kind of think about my life as a whole and I think about what I want to get done. And I think, like, you know what? I don't feel the need to go back to this record. And to
Hmm.
that degree, that's fine. Now, if someone asks me, hey, have you heard this record? I'll say, yeah, I listened to it once. I didn't really care for it. I won't say, oh yeah, I hate that record. That record is bad. Like, I don't really, I only
Hmm.
listened to it once and
Right.
I don't really know. And maybe I'll listen to it 50 more times and still feel exactly the same way. I don't know. But yeah, you need to live with something a little bit. And if you want to truly review something, you need to take time with it,
Right.
because I'm even okay with someone saying, like, well, my initial impressions are
Right.
so on and so forth. But yeah, for someone to say, like, here's my review, and even with that, like, I could feel pretty confident telling you what I think about 33 and a third, because I've listened to 33 and a third at least, probably 30 or 40 times in my life.
Hmm.
I feel pretty confident how I feel. But also, I'm writing this book ranking the solo albums, and I tell you what, I'm going to say when I finish it, not if I finish it, because I need to just speak it into existence. When I finish it, it is really going to be a product of, like, where am I at right up until I go and send it off to print?
Hmm.
Because 33 and a third, if I'm ranking all the albums today, it could be my number 13 or my number 34. Like, I don't know. I mean,
Huh.
there's 69 records. And I
Hmm.
would say, for me, 69 including, I personally include the 3 John and Yoko experimental records and George's 2 Wonderwall Electronic Sound, like, because those are a part of canon. If you look up those artist discographies, those are always mentioned. Now, I
Okay.
don't count the Firemen. I wish I could, because I would love to rank because it's not. If you look at, I do count Wings, because and I actually agree with you. I think that Wings needs to be talked about separately from his solo work. But if you look anywhere, literally anywhere, any publication, if they, like, even the official, like, websites of these artists, it's like, what is canon? And for McCartney, Wings is a part of his solo canon. The Firemen, the classical stuff, that is separate. I
Hmm.
don't know why that is, but that's what it is. So the 69 records I'm looking at are canon. And
But
so
you can make up your own rules. It's your book.
I can, but I'm a slave to the to the framework that society has planned out for us, Ken.
Oh,
That's all it is. No, it's that's how I've been doing it, and who knows, maybe we'll see. I would need to listen to Strawberries Ocean Ships Forest a lot more times, which, to be honest, I don't know how much I want to do that, but
I don't know
we'll.
how you can't put electric arguments in this. I mean, it's
I can't, and I wish I could.
hmm,
I really like that record, and
hmm.
I do think, you know what? Yeah, I will go on record as saying this. I think it was a mistake for him not to make that a Paul McCartney. I think he should have said, "Here's a Paul McCartney record produced by youth." I think
Hmm.
I think he should have done that. I think that would have been good for him, but that's neither here nor there.
You
I
could be
would say
right
for
about
me,
that. Yeah.
yeah. I hold on, my head. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
I
Good.
just want to make one
I
correction
had to
about
take them
something
out.
that I said. I do
It was.
believe overall. No, I want to make a correction about something I just said
Oh,
earlier.
okay.
I do believe Paul's more influenced by the producers that he works with than the musicians. However, it was different in Wings.
No, I
The
agree.
Wings members played a big part on those records, from who sang lead vocals, who wrote. Denny Lane wrote a lot of
Mhm.
songs. He wrote a lot of songs with Paul. They did songs live. I always bring up the fact Wings Over America, Denny Lane sang 5 songs. There's a big difference there between that and the musicians that he worked with later on, from the Hamish Stewart and Robbie McIntosh period
Mhm.
through his current band of the last 20 plus years. So yeah, there's a big
Well,
difference there.
well, because even as a musician too, you listen to a song like Medicine Jar,
Hmm.
and Paul's bass playing, he doesn't need to work, he's doing some background vocals, but he's not singing lead. He can sit back. And look, Paul is an amazing bassist, and you can find something on probably every solo record where you're like, holy cow, listen to that. And even recent stuff, I mean, See Your Sunshine is the obvious example where you're
Oh
like,
God,
oh,
awesome.
but
His
but
bass.
Wings was one of the last times in a studio environment that he got to be like a bassist in a live band. And I think there's something to be said for that. And that's because Wings was a band. And yes, largely Wings was a vehicle for his solo music. You can't deny that, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a real band. And it doesn't,
Absolutely.
and just because it was a vehicle for his solo music doesn't mean that Denny Lane was less of a member or Linda was less than a member. Like, those 3 are Wings. Like the sound of their 3 voices together, that for me is Wings.
Hmm.
Because and I love Jimmy McCulloch, and I love Joe English, and I love Lawrence Duber and Steve Hawley. And those 2 versions of Wings, they are very different, but it's still Wings, and it's because you've got those 3. You've got Paul, Linda, and Denny, and that, to me, that's a band. Just like the Beatles was a bit like, John joking when George walked out, like, oh, we'll get Clapton. Like, yeah, but it wouldn't be the Beatles because
Right.
George is the Beatles. And I think the reason the Rolling Stones have gotten away with, kind of shuffling in some members in and out, even though I would argue that Mick Taylor was a better fit for that band than Ron Wood. Nothing against Ron Wood. I love him. But, ultimately, the Rolling Stones is what Mick brings vocally and the attitude that Keith brings on his guitar. And yeah, absolutely, the backbeat that Charlie brings. So it's not to say that, oh, well, Bill Wyman, like, screw him. Like, you can replace him with anyone. Like, no, Bill Wyman was a great bass player. And yeah, like I said, I would prefer if Mick Taylor was still in the band. But it works with them because that's what the band is. The Beatles could, those 4 guys, and anyone who tries to say that Ringo wasn't as important, they don't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But with Wings too, Paul, Linda, and Denny, they found it pretty early. Like, I'm kind of, whenever I listen to Wildlife and I hear those harmonies on Love Is Strange, I think, how come this isn't on every song on this record? This sounds so, that's my favorite song on Wildlife, because those harmonies are so damn good. They found it early. And
How about
it did.
Some People Never Know? Harmonies on that. Or
They're
amazing.
great. Is
Yeah.
Denny on that though? I think that's just Paul and Linda, and it sounds amazing. I love
think
Linda's.
Denny Lane's on it. I'd have to check. Oh,
You're probably right. I need to go back and listen too. But that's the thing with Wings. It doesn't matter. They might be doing a super rocker like Medicine Jar, or they might be doing poppy, fluffy with a little luck, or they might be doing whatever. But those three voices are in there, and that's Wings.
yeah. I do think the fourth and fifth members in the three major lineups all made a difference too. But
Absolutely, and all great in their own ways, I would say.
yeah,
But yeah, what were we talking about?
I don't know. How do we stop this?
I don't know. God, is anyone watching still? All right. So anyone who's still watching, Ken will be giving away free.
No. So why don't we wrap things up? I'm definitely having you back here. You don't have any say in the matter now, but definitely I want to talk about Ringo's drumming in his solo career. Your favorite drumming. We'll have you back for that.
Okay.
Okay, but if
Very
people
good.
want to get in touch with you, and we should talk about your band, The Gentlemen,
So yeah, well,
or should I have not brought that up?
no. Wow, Ken. I see that you're honoring Larry King by not doing your research. No, so The Gentlemen. So I live in Nashville, Tennessee now. I've been living here for about 4.5 years. I grew up, was raised in Rhode Island, lived there for 4.5 years. So we're from the same neck of the woods. So once we're off air, we can talk about all the free agency moves that the Patriots have made, whether we like them or not.
I don't follow football, but that's okay.
Oh, yeah, are you a Yankees or a Red Sox guy?
Neither. Mets.
Okay, I can deal with that.
Okay.
I have a fun story to tell you later. But
okay.
So I'm from back in Rhode Island, and I have my band back home, Dylan, Sevey, and the Gentlemen, which I'm using a bunch of our CDs to hold up and prop up my phone right now. And
okay.
Here's our last record that came out 6 years ago. It's called New Mischief. But yeah, once I moved down to Nashville, obviously not playing too much together, but we get back together once a year whenever I go home around the holidays. And this obviously didn't do it this last year because of the pandemic, but back in 2019, to celebrate 50 years of Abbey Road, we covered the entire medley, starting with Because. And that was, talk about Abbey Road's probably my favorite album of all time. And I somehow appreciated it even more, like after learning those songs. But yep, we, like you said, there's a performance on YouTube. I put together an event this past November to help celebrate would have been Tom Petty's 70th birthday. Tom Petty's probably my number 3. I'd probably go Beatles, Dylan, Petty. And then I love the White Stripes. I love Zeppelin. I love Springsteen. I love the band. I love the Who. I love the Stones. I don't know. We'll go. I love Wilco. You know what? Everyone hold on. I'm going to figure this out. No. But I put together this event. Tom Petty would have been 70 last year. And wanted to honor him. So I got together 111 different artists to cover one of his songs and sequence them for 7 different streams to benefit 7 different organizations. And it happened right before the election. So we raised money for Black Lives Matter, Transgender Law Center, Music Cares, bunch of really great organizations doing great things. And so went back home safely, followed all the right protocols, and got back together with the band. And we did one of my favorite Petty deep cuts. He put out a record in 2002 that is criminally overlooked, criminally overrated, called The Last DJ. And there are 8 or 9 stone cold gems on that record. And one of them is one of my favorite songs called Lost Children, which is just an unbelievably cool part, I guess, blues rock, part psychedelia. And that was always one of our favorite Petty songs to cover. So we did that. That's up on YouTube. And then our stuff is on Bandcamp. and which is available for purchase. Again, this is our last record that came out in 2015. I'd say it's the one to listen to. I am horrifically embarrassed whenever I listen back to them because I hate how my voice sounds all the time. But I did put out a solo song in November 2019, which is also on our Bandcamp, called Understood Up for Myself, that I don't hate. Recorded that here in Nashville. Very happy with that. And, hopefully this year, my money tree will sprout and I'll be able to get back in the studio and record a little bit more because I've been writing a lot recently. And looking to do some new music soon. But in the meantime, down here in Nashville, I played drums with a lot of musicians down here. I'm currently playing drums with a band called the Minks, M-I-N-K.
Okay.
So for all of you guys and dolls enthusiasts, bring back my mink, just think of that. And so I've been playing with them. We actually just recorded a new record a couple weeks ago, which was just the most, feeling like a return to normalcy was the best. And but that is mostly the project of one of my best friends here in town. Her name is Nikki Barber. Great songwriter, great singer, great front woman. And so she has a record that she put out as the Minks. I play on a couple songs from it, came out in 2019. That's on Spotify and Bandcamp. And then I played for a few years with a guy named Ron Gallo, we were touring quite a bit. We did a bunch of European tours, American tours, and I'm on a couple records that we put out through New West. He just put out a new one that I'm not on. I'm on his record called Stardust Birthday Party. And also I'm on an EP called Really Nice Guys, which is an entire concept EP about how ridiculous the music industry is. And the song Really Nice Guys is about when you go to a show and you see an opening act and they're really nice guys. So you don't want to say anything bad about them, but they're just not cutting it. But there's actually a really, really Beatlesy song on that EP that I think you and probably anyone listening would enjoy. So it's by Ron Gallo, Rongallo. The EP is called Really Nice Guys, and the song is called Emotional Impact for Sale. And we actually did the because trick. So me, Ron, and our bassist Joe, we all sang in 3-part, and then we triple tracked our harmonies. So it's really, really fun, and one of my favorite songs I've ever helped record. And then recently, I was playing a little bit with a guy down here named Aaron Lee Tasjan, which is Aaron Lee and then Tasjan, and he just put out a new record. I play on about half of it. Another one of my favorite songs I've ever been a part of recording is a song called Computer of Love, and I was in the music video for it that just came out recently as well. And the whole record is unbelievable. Aaron is also a gigantic Beatles fan, gigantic Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne fan. So lots of some Full Moon Fever vibes kind of across the record. And I'm so honored to be a part of it. And I mean, Aaron has played with everyone. He played for a little bit in a band called Driving and Crying that I'm sure you've heard of. Yep. He played in the New York Dolls for a little bit. Wow. He's done everything, and he's just an unbelievable musician, unbelievable person. So I would highly recommend everyone check out Aaron Lee Tasjan, and I am on the newest one, about half of it, but all of his records are amazing. So that's where people can hear me.
You're still busy even in the middle of this pandemic here, so
not as busy as I'd like, but everything I have done has been done completely safe and following all the right protocols. And thankfully there's a light at the end of the tunnel now. And I'm really excited for that. I'm excited to get back out there, and really, really proud of the work I just did with the Minks. And hopefully we'll be doing some shows, at least some outdoor shows over the summer, maybe some low scale touring by the end of the year. And excited for everyone to hear that.
Yeah,
And
we're going to have to provide links to all this stuff.
I'll send you some stuff, and then, you know, hopefully I'll have this book out by 2056. And
It'll be before Mark Lewison, so, you know.
hey,
I'm just
look,
kidding, Mark.
you can say that because you're his friend. I haven't met him yet, so I need to say, hey, he's a brilliant man, Ken. Don't make fun of that. Also, Mark, you can reach me at dylansevey@gmail.com if you want to talk. So,
Okay.
and everyone.
So
can
I'm
reach me.
sorry for that Larry King moment, but you know, you filled us in.
Hopefully, you know, kind of knowing a bit more about Larry King. Hopefully, that's your only Larry King moment. But that's
If it starts to repeat, you better let me know. Get a shovel ready.
You seem like you have better journalistic and moral integrity than Larry King. I'll give you that. You might not have as much money, but you have that.
Okay. What do you mean I don't have as much money? Look at this behind me.
Hey, look. Yeah, have you bought the suitcase yet, or is Tom gonna sell you his?
No, that's never going to happen.
Me neither.
I have no interest in it. You know.
You want to know how many copies of McCartney 3 I have?
That's exactly how many I have.
And I don't blame or shame anyone for doing what they want to do. But for me, firstly, I'm broke as hell. So if anyone wants to reach me at Venmo, it's at Dylan-Sevey. I accept all donations. But on top of that, even if I did have the money, I just, you know, there's certain things I do like, certain tangible things. I would probably buy a lot more records, but I just don't need multiple copies of the same record. That's just not me. But we all have our things. I have my weirdo habits that I'm sure no one else gets, but it makes me happy.
It makes you you. But yes. I'm very much like that. I mean, I really have never cared about collector's items and all that. As long as I have every song, every B-side, every, you know, song on a CD single, the output is what matters. The music is what matters. It's not
me too.
All the colored vinyl. But, you know, if you're into that, that's fine.
I don't care how bad some of it is. Ringo, get the Chips Moment sessions out. We need to hear it. And if it is bad, we won't say anything. We'll just say thank you.
Okay.
And we'll talk behind our backs. Maybe you shouldn't have.
All right. Well, Dylan, this has got to be probably the most effortless conversation I've ever had. It's just so easy to talk to you.
I appreciate
this could have gone on for 5 hours easily.
It could have. I wrote up all these notes too, so I could sound smart and not get off my game, and I barely read any of them too. So likewise, I barely had to think about it.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks to everybody for watching. If you can, please subscribe to our channel for Ken Michaels Radio. Subscribe to Two Legs. Subscribe to Talk More Talk. Subscribe to Things We Said Today. Don't leave your house. Just watch all of our videos. That's all that you need to do. And if Dylan's on more often, you'll be glued to my channel, I'm sure.
Hopefully I have that magnetic energy that keeps them coming back.
Thanks so much, Dylan. Thanks to all of you for watching, and we'll see you next time.